Hey, welcome to Page Break. I'm your host, Brian McClellan, coming to you on a sunny, quiet day in the mountains of Utah. Today's guest is multi-genre novelist and comic writer Delilah S. Dawson. Delilah is known for widespread work with tie-in fiction, including Star Wars, Spiderman, Rick and Morty, Hellboy, and Firefly. She writes fantasy under the name Lila Bowen with the Shadow series, and comedy fantasy in partnership with Kevin Hearne on the Tales of Pell series. Her next book, a middle-grade horror novel called Mine, is out on August 10th, 2021. Delilah and I talk about exercise as a form of creative inspiration, the grueling schedule of a comic writer, and Delilah's experience working on Star Wars. Enjoy my chat with Delilah S. Dawson. How have you been doing?
It used me to sum up the last year and a half.
Right. It's a little bit much, isn't it?
It is. Well, it's also, it's hard to think back to when things were normal, because the new normal is so strange and hermit crabbish. It's like, what were you when you weren't a hermit crab? And you're like, a little tiny pink thing that was out in the world lost. I don't know. I like the shell.
Right.
But I really miss, the cons and stuff. It was, I don't know. It's hitting me hard now, not being able to go, because all of our friends are spread out across the world and the country, and we would see each other for, 3 or 4 days a year. And now we don't even get that. Right.
Everybody keeps asking me, what's your next con? What are you going to do? When are you going to be in person again? And I'm not scheduling anything. Because I don't know how the Delta variant is going to end up affecting big crowds. And I said yes to Salt Lake FanX in September. And I'm still kind of am I comfortable with that already? Being in a room with 100,000 people?
Yeah. Same. In between the time when I said yes to Dragon Con and now the Delta and the Delta and Lambda apparently weren't on the radar back then. It's like, oh, we're good. I've got both of my vaccinations. Let's do this. And now it's like, oh, please, if I do this, make people wear masks. Don't do that. We trust you. Sure, you're vaccinated.
Right. And I don't know. So who knows? I don't know when I'm going to start actually seeing my writer friends in person again.
But we've moved. We were in Tampa, Florida, and now we're back in Atlanta, Georgia.
Yeah.
So change of pace here. Even if today it's super rainy, so it kind of feels like Florida for a few minutes. But we have seasons again, and it only gets up to 91 degrees instead of 101. So there's changes.
Man, here in Utah, our summer so far, we usually get above 100 for a little bit each summer, and we've had above 100 10 days already this year.
Well, y'all get fires too, I've noticed lately.
Yeah.
That wasn't a thing I remember hearing about before I followed a couple people over there.
Yeah. No, the last couple of years we've had really bad wildfires. And last year we had just the mountain right that we live on caught fire. And
I remember seeing your pictures. It was so just constantly hazy.
It's terrifying. We had the neighborhood, the next neighborhood down got evacuated, but no houses got hit from that fire. So fingers crossed that doesn't happen again anytime soon.
Yeah, fire. It's everywhere you live, it seems like there's something that's going to get you. And it's over here, it's tornadoes. It's okay, well, I know what to do with that. But it's fires and earthquakes, I don't feel comfortable around.
Right. And that's my wife and I talk about moving to California at some point, but you'd get fires and earthquakes.
It's going to snap off like a piece of pie crust one day. Every time I go to San Diego Comic-Con, I'm just don't snap off today.
Right, exactly. Do you guys kind of get hit at all with the hurricane?
We get what we have today, which I'm guessing is Elsa roll off, which is just 2 or 3 hours of pretty hardcore rain that started a leak in my basement. So thanks, Elsa.
Oh, nice.
But actual hurricanes, once they hit land, they kind of die off.
Yeah. Tropical storm or whatever.
Yeah.
What they call it.
So sometimes they can kick off little tornadoes up here, but
yeah, that's not, I want to say, I almost said that's not too bad, but I'm sure it still sucks.
It sucks. But when you have a basement, it's not as worrisome. In Florida, when we had to deal with the hurricanes, there are no basements in Florida because the water table and the lime is oh, do you want a sinkhole? That's how you get sinkholes. So when there was a hurricane, you're just oh, well, we're in the laundry room.
My growing up in Ohio, we would occasionally get tornadoes. And every time we'd get one of those big storms, my mom would immediately go to the basement with a hand crank radio and like a little extra flashlight and like, huddled under a blanket. And my dad would be standing on the front patio watching the storm go by.
There are two kinds of people.
Exactly. Always a good time.
Yeah.
But hey, how's the writing been? You are, I was trying to do a little bit of more research for this because you and I haven't even talked since the last time we saw each other in person.
Yeah.
And you are stupidly prolific to the point where I'm slightly annoyed.
I mean, it's how I manage my anxiety, depression. It's my dopaminergic system at work.
Yeah.
It worked out back in 2019. I was really loaded up on comics. I was doing a bunch of comics for IDW and Boom.
Mm-hmm.
And, comics, you're getting 10, 20 emails every day. You're changing your scripts, you're okaying inks and pencils and, letters, and like, it's near constant. So I didn't write any new books in 2019. I was out of contract for the first time since I started writing in 2012.
Yeah.
It was terrifying. So as soon as the pandemic hit, I had nothing to do. So I was just writing constantly. So now we're seeing the kind of downriver flow of that. That place where the dog squatted is turning yellow now.
Man, that's great. So let's start a little bit with the comics, because you've done quite a few of them now. And because when we met, I know you as a novel writer.
Yeah.
But when did you get into comics?
You were there, my dude.
Was I?
Remember Gen Con 2015?
I mean, I don't remember anything before like 6 months ago. So.
Oh no, you were there. We went to the Weber Grill Steakhouse with the whole crew of people.
Oh yes, I do remember that. Yeah.
So at Gen Con 2015, my first and only Gen Con, I was asked to be on a panel called Writing Comics for Women, something like that. But they realized at the last moment that their Writing Comics for Women panel was 5 white guys. So they kind of freaked out, and they asked me and a couple of other people to be on that panel. And because I had written like 3 comics for an anthology twice, like I'd written 12 pages of comics in my entire life, they asked me, and I was I'll do my best, man. Like, I'm happy to help. So I was on this panel, and it was so bad that the Mary Sue did like a 2-day expose on the things that occurred with what the panel's host said.
Yeah.
The moderator was a little bit biased, and it wasn't for women.
Ooh.
So I said in there, I was like, I want to write comics, but I'm finding it difficult to break into comics as a woman. And that day, an editor from Boom emailed me and was like, hey, I saw you wanted to write comics. Do you want to pitch me? And so I pitched him some stuff, and that's where Lady Castle, my first comic, came from.
Mm-hmm.
So from that day at Gen Con.
That's dang cool. I didn't realize that was like when we were hanging out.
Yeah.
Man, that's very fun. And you've kind of kept up on that then.
Well, I mean, not right now. I quit last year because it was becoming where I realized like writing books is my heartstrings. It's what I really love, and I like comics. But I guess if we're talking numbers, I got my tax returns, and I saw that like a whole year of just throwing myself into comics head first, 10, 20, 30 emails a day, like working myself to the bone, had made less money than one book.
Ooh.
For what felt like 10 times as much work.
Yeah.
So it kind of got to be that sense of like, unless I'm really, really in love with the project, I'm kind of sticking with books right now.
Right.
So yeah, but I mean, I got to write Star Wars Adventures and Spiderman and Firefly and Labyrinth and Adventure Time and Rick and Morty, and work with Aaron Mahnke of Lore to do a comic. So like, I got to do some really cool stuff. And like, if they came to me and were like, hey, I'm gonna write some Transformers, I'd just like drop the book and be like, yes. But I'm kind of chill on it now.
Do you think so? Did you start doing tie-in stuff with comics before you started writing book and short story tie-in stuff?
No. So my first tie-in was like back in 2012 when my first book came out. Someone I met at a writing con, Kevin Maurer, who wrote the book about capturing Osama bin Laden, recommended me to Amazon's Kindle Worlds when they were starting that. And so they sent me a message asking if I wanted to write in the Valiant Comics world. So I wrote a short story novella, I guess, for Shadow Man.
Mm-hmm.
That was my first IP project. And so then I asked my agent, when our friend Chuck Wendig got to write Star Wars, I was like, please, agent, tell Star Wars I want to write for them. And so I got to write my first Star Wars piece was a novella called The Perfect Weapon about a character from The Force Awakens.
Yeah.
And then it worked up to Phasma, my first Star Wars book.
Mm-hmm.
And so at that point, in order to write Phasma, I had to go to Lucasfilm offices in San Francisco and read the script for The Last Jedi.
Uh-huh.
And so it came that IDW wanted to do some comics about Rose Tico. And, you have to have so much time to get the writing and the artwork done that they're going, oh God, like, we don't have time to get someone through the NDAs to read this script. Can we find a woman who's read the script who writes comics? And I was the only person in that, that like little Venn diagram. So I got to write Star Wars Adventures, and that's kind of where it picked up, I think.
Like right place at the right time kind of thing.
Yeah, it was very fortunate. But I guess they liked it well enough to invite me on to do some other works too. So I've loved working with IDW and Boom. Both of them have been really cool.
Yeah. Now, do you think, so you mentioned comics being a lot more work than just sitting down and writing a novel.
Oh yeah.
Is that creative work? Is it trying to kind of coordinate with, artist and editor and stuff like that? Where does that extra work come from? Because when I open a comic as a writer, I look at that and say, oh, there's like, 2 lines on every page or, whatever. And I'm experienced enough to realize that it's way more complicated than that. But I've also never actually done it. And so where does the extra work come from?
It comes from the added layers of the fact that it's a collaboration between the writer and the many artists working on it. And the artists do the heavy lifting. Like, the writing is, I think, the easy part. I have utmost respect for comics, inkers, colors, and letterers. But basically, if I'm writing an IP book, they say, hey, do you want to write this? I send over 3 or 4 pitches. They pick a pitch. And over the course of a week or two, we develop an outline that, is probably 10 to 15 pages. And then we get the blessings from, the IP holder, and I write. And then unless I have a question, I don't really need anything from them. They don't need anything from me. And I turn it in before my deadline, and then we go into edits. With comics, it feels like they don't have as firm of an idea as what they want a lot of the time, or there are more people involved. So like, if I'm working on Star Wars, it's my editor at Del Rey, and then the Lucasfilm Story Group and some other shareholders. If I am working on Spiderman, it's my editor at IDW, his boss at IDW, the Marvel comics people, the Marvel movie people, the Disney people. So there's just like, and then we also have to coordinate it with all the other Spider-Man stuff that's going on to make sure that we're not, both writing the same arc. So that's all that involved. So once you get that hammered down and you get a script and then you get it to the artist, it's like every time they have ink pages, they send you sketches.
Yeah.
You have to okay those and say like, no, when I said this, I meant this, or, you missed this part, or let's do this, so you have to edit that. And then they come in again and you have to get it right. And then the inker comes in, and then the colorist comes in, and then the letters come in, and you have to adjust, your script might change. Like, there might not be enough room for all of your words. You might need to change them a little bit. It's just this constant kind of back and forth conversation. Whereas, a book is more like a long distance epistolary relationship. Like, you write your letter, you send it off, and you wait until someone else gets you back a letter. Whereas comics is just like constant noise. Like, I remember I can't remember which comic it was. I think it might have been the lore comic, where I finally had to say to the editor, like, can I get less emails per day? Because I don't think I'm necessary for this, and it's making me a crazy person. I can't get anything done.
Yeah. Man, that sounds just absolutely bonkers. As I've been doing this podcast, I've been talking to some people about collaborative kind of storytelling and writing and doing IP work and things like that. And it always blows my mind how different something that on the surface seems very similar to what I do for a living, which is just write the big fat books. You would think that would be very similar to doing comics, or even to writing a novel that's owned by someone else. But it really isn't. Things change so much when you have kind of other creative input and like kind of that oversight, I guess.
Well, there's also the point where, if I write a book and I send it off to my editor and they say, can you tweak the ending? Could you add in a scene, to show this part of the character arc? I'm like, oh yeah, that's a great idea. I pop open the book, I find the right page, I add 10,000 words. Nobody's life is really changed by that.
Yeah.
In a comic, a change like that can cost, like if you legitimately have to make a change like that, it can cost thousands of dollars. People might have to redo the pages, where they have to completely redo the art or the color. And if you really do the art, you have to do the colors and the letters. Like it ripples down. So you have to make sure that it's kind of, everybody is certain and it's nailed down. You just don't have that freedom of the book of like, oh yeah, I can throw out 10,000 words, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fascinating. Do you think that you prefer to work in that kind of more hectic IP world, where you're playing in someone else's sandbox, versus kind of being in, as much total control as any author is?
I mean, I love a mix of both.
Yeah.
I knew I was never kind of cut out for the indie world. I don't want to be the publisher and the editor and the cover designer. And like, I knew that I didn't want to do that. So I accepted from the first book that like, this baby was not my baby. I had joint custody with another shareholder,
Right.
So I was never that person that was like, this is you can't change anything. I was always like, oh, you have good ideas. Cool. Let's do that. And I've been very lucky also that, I've had editors all along that if they said, could you make this edit? And sometimes it'd be like, oh, I would rather we did this because I was going for this and this and this. Let me make that more apparent on the page. And they're like, oh, okay. So I've never really had something that I was super disturbed about that an editor asked me to change.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I really like to mix it up because, your own books, we have these ideas and we're driven to write them. And it's amazing when an editor, sees a spark there and wants to buy it and take it wide. And that's great. But the IP work, I always think of it like being put into a room filled with all of your favorite toys.
Yeah.
Like, oh my God, I want to play with all of these toys right now. Here's all the things I can do with these toys. I've heard people say like, oh, did you feel like you're put in a box? And it's like, I do my best work in a box.
Huh.
So it's fine. But it's also like when you do IP, you don't have to do the heavy lifting of world building. I don't have to work out the science or math of Star Wars.
Right.
I just get to play with the characters that I want to play with. And if I need a new planet or a new ship or a new animal, I just invent it. So there's still some leeway there.
Oh, that's really cool. So do you feel like you've had an ultimately good experience with doing all this various IP work?
Oh yeah. Oh God, I've been so lucky. I have had just the coolest editors for everything that I've done. I mean, my Star Wars editors are incredible. Elizabeth and Tom. And I just like hanging out with them, like at the cons when the con day is over, like I go back to the booth. I'm like, are you guys going out to dinner? Like, I just want to be friends with them.
Yeah.
And my comics editors, Denton at IDW and Chris at Boom, they're both out of the editing kind of game right now, but like they were really cool. Firefly editors were very cool, but I've never like really butted heads with anybody or had any kind of problem. There are some issues, like you have to have a certain kind of tenacity to write for, especially Star Wars.
Yeah.
Like a book an author writes yourself, you have maybe your agent puts in some input, you have your editor, maybe your editor has, a protege that might, get to throw the book around or whatever, but that's kind of it. Phasma came back and there were so many people arguing in the comments that it crashed Word. There were like 17 people trying to decide if the ship that I had like plucked out of my old RPG book could have been in that sector in that year or what the quad drive yards were doing. And I was just like, guys, just tell me a ship. I don't care. Like any ship. I don't care. This is
right.
not. So yeah, it's like I haven't had problems, but there have definitely been some interesting challenges because, different people are trying to accomplish different things, and your job is to make them happy ultimately.
Do you, and I know that this might be a sore spot, so I can back off of it if need be, but do you find yourself getting very frustrated from having to work in an IP where the fan base is so rabid and huge and some of them worship you and some of you want to kill you? Like, is that super stressful?
When your book is a hot new thing and people are talking about it, there's definitely some fans who show their fierce love of an IP by tearing down people.
Right.
But what we kind of there's like a secret Star Wars family of people who reach out to the new people and are like, honey, if you have questions, come to me because you're gonna get attacked, and just block them. Don't worry, just block them. I remember going to my editors and be like, these people are being mean, but I don't want to make fans mad. And they were like, no, just block them and move on. Like, you don't owe them anything. They were very, very supportive about that. But yeah, I've definitely pulled away from I don't want to say political statements, but like I'm not going to poke the bear.
Right.
I'm a mom with 2 kids living a life. Like I don't need people being super mad at me. There's nothing I need badly enough out of my Star Wars fiction to have, people coming after me in droves. So like, I guess it kind of ramps up when a book's coming out, and then they kind of lay low, or maybe I've just muted or blocked enough of them. But on the other side of the fence, like I wrote an X-Files book. It was super chill. The X-Files people were like super chill. They liked it. There were almost no edits. There were no problems. And like the fans were super lovely.
Yeah.
And, the Firefly, I guess I didn't get to do that much PR for it because Firefly The Sting came out like right before or during I can't quite remember, but it was like very close to the pandemic. So I don't even know. I don't think I ever even got to sign that one at all.
Right.
But Firefly people have been very nice. I was worried I would make the Rick and Morty crowd annoyed, but they didn't come after me. So yeah, I don't know. It's so hard because online it's real easy to take pot shots, but you go to Star Wars Celebration and just everyone is so filled with love and joy and hope and kindness. Like there's just nobody. I guess it's because it takes so much energy to love something at that level where like I bought the airplane tickets, I got the plane tickets, I got the celebration tickets, like I stopped my life to come here, and you're like, this is all positive stuff, whereas online you can just throw pot shots at anybody. It doesn't cost you anything.
Yeah. Huh. Do you find that when you go to those kind of events, are you seen as just the person writing for that world? Or do you have people come up to you with your own books or other universe stuff and say, oh, can we sign this or want to talk about it?
Yeah, no, we do get that. And it's awesome. Like, I'm always happy to geek out about pretty much anything. So yeah, I've signed things. People will stand in line and be like, is this okay? And I'm like, yeah. And people will be like, I'm so sorry. My book is so torn up. And I'm like, no, well-loved book is like the biggest, that's the biggest honor you can give an author, to be like, I have loved the heck out of this book.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of people come up to Christy Golden and bring her World of Warcraft books when she's signing at Star Wars Celebration. And people are just like a sheet of tears because they love her World of Warcraft so much. So yeah, I mean, we all kind of get that, but it's all love. Like, it's all good. I'm happy to sign pretty much anything. Like, maybe not under the bathroom stall, but like, I'll stop in the hallway for you. If you come to the Firefly panel, I'll sign your Star Wars book. Like, I'm pretty easy.
Yeah. Yeah. I always just kind of wonder how much, I guess, cross-pollination there is between fandoms, and that sort of thing. And I've kind of done, I've asked, various authors, kind of what their experiences are. And, obviously I'm not going to name any names, but I know some authors who have had kind of bad experiences doing IP work. And it always gives me kind of a mixed feeling, because there's some authors that seem to just love it. And they work within that system very well. And there's other authors that they try to do that system and immediately feel very bad about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's not only a very specific skill set that not a ton of people have. I mean, you have to be able to, in general, produce about 110,000 words in 6 to 8 weeks. And they have to be sharp enough that you only maybe need one more round of editing.
Yeah.
You have to be able to pivot on a dime. If you come up with a 15-page, I went for one of my books, I had a 14, let's not lie. A 14-page single-spaced outline. And one day I came home and there was a huge box of cookies on my front porch, like New York, big, giant, meaty, expensive cookies. And I was like, somebody trying to poison me? Like, what is this? Who would send? I don't know anybody in New York. Who's sending me cookies? And then I get the email that's like, dear Delilah, I am so sorry. We have lost the complete outline. We're going to have to start over.
Oh, man.
And you just have to be like, all right, okay, what do you want? Like, what do you want? But lots of people can't do that. You get very hung up on things, or some brains need more order and stability. So you have to be able to pivot. You have to be able to take the criticism and as it's meant, and not be like, no, this is my precious, beautiful, perfect thing. You have to be like, yeah, no, that's cool. You own it. You get to decide how you want it. And I think it also depends, especially for some other people I've spoken to writing in the same IPs, on who your editors are.
Yeah.
And the kind of rapport that you have with them and their editing style. Like I said, I've been super fortunate to have really just vibed with all of my editors and have been on the same page.
That's very cool. I'm glad to hear that. It's fun to hear kind of the alternate side of that, and to know that some people are really genuinely having a good time with it.
I mean, it's not easy. Like there are hard moments, especially like after the ramp up of the Star Wars book, the fast writing, the fast editing. the big deal of it coming out, like I get burnout usually after both of my Star Wars books have come out. I've had my biggest cases of burnout where I was just like anhedonia. Like when my agent called me and was like, number 10. And I was like, number 10, what? She was like, number 10 on the New York Times bestseller list. And I was like, what is? And she was like, your book. And I was like, oh, cool. She was like, aren't you excited? And I was like, sure.
Right.
It was a weird moment. Like you expect this to be this high of your life. And instead you're just like, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Just that your brain is just totally mush at that point, I imagine.
Yeah. But you're also just kind of done with it where you're like, well, okay.
Right. Oh, that's fascinating because like when, and I'm sure you've had the same experience because when you have your own work coming out, it's so like you finish the book and you turn in the final copy and then it's not even out for like 8 months, like, or more. And so when it does come out, you're suddenly excited about it again. You've had enough time to decompress from it and you're like, oh, hey, yes, I have a book out. Yay.
Yeah. I mean, like the day that it shows up on your doorstep and you're like, oh my God, I'm holding it. It's real. Like that's a great moment though.
Right.
But I'll say like for Star Wars books, my favorite moment is typically the moment that I get to like announce it on stage. Because both of mine, I've gotten to announce them in like the stage with like 10 people on it and 1,000 people in the crowd and a Jumbotron. Like that's the best moment. After that, it's all work.
Oh man, that's got to feel awesome. I've been asked to do IP work just a couple of times. And both times my agent has basically taken me aside and, digitally and said, look, Brian, this is not your brand. You are doing fantastic with the epic fantasy. The money's just not quite good enough. The effort you would put into it's not quite, it's not worth it for you. And I always, both times I've just felt kind of like, oh, am I missing like the coolest opportunity to work for Wizards of the Coast, or something like that. And I think my agent's always right in terms of what's best for my personal career. But man, I also have a standing order for her that if for some reason, Lucasfilm comes to her and says, we want Brian to do like a Boba Fett novella. Yeah, that's happening no matter what. Like, it's funny how you kind of get authors that end up almost pivoting to kind of IP authors. I got to meet Christy Golan a couple of years ago at a convention in Poland. And I didn't really know who she was, but we sat on a table together and there was a bunch of people talking. So I, surreptitiously Googled who she was really quick. And I'm like, holy crap, her career is massive. And then I ended up having a really fascinating conversation with her about all this stuff. And it's such a cool, different world. But like I said earlier, it's a world that you think would overlap with my own career, but it kind of doesn't.
Well, it's going to be, I think, the right project for you too. I've been offered a couple of IP projects that it was like, we want 150,000 words. And then the money that they offered me was like 1/5 as much as I've gotten for like my lowest personal book, where you're like, that's not even worth my time. Like to even outline it, it's not really worth my time. And then you're just like, people must be accepting this rate, to do it. I also had one that had a higher rate than usual. It was pretty much twice my normal rate for half the words, but it was an IP that for a game I didn't play in a world I would have taken so much to ramp me up. And I kind of started reading some other things in the area, and I was like, this is not, it didn't connect. And it felt like if I did take this, I would be taking it away from somebody who really loved it. Like that it would mean a big deal to them, and it would be the best day of their career to get this message. Whereas for me, it would have just been like, I'm just doing it for the money. And like, I don't want to be that person. I really got to care. Like you have to live in this world, know these characters, have all of the resources, be able to do the deep dive. Like, I don't know, if you look back here, there's so many Star Wars books. That's only one of my Star Wars reference shelves up there. Like, there's another one outside. I've got all the old RPG books. Like I've got all the open it up and see the inside of the ship books. Like I already had that before they wanted me to write it, but some other worlds, I'm like, it take a lot to ramp me up to this. And then I see who actually gets it. And I'm like, oh, this is a perfect project for you. I'm so glad you got it.
Do you think that saying no is a luxury?
Yeah. I mean, I think that an artist always has to have their hard no's.
Yeah.
There's nothing worse than this heart-sinking feeling of like, I am tethered to this project. I don't like it. I'm not enjoying it. Writing it is torture. I'm not going to be proud of it at the end. Like nobody wants that feeling. So, but I mean, I've been very privileged. Like I started writing as a stay-at-home mom with a supportive spouse. So like I kind of always had the privilege of saying no, which some people don't have.
Right. Do you find that you like the world of being able to sit at home in your office and just kind of be I guess a self-starter, I suppose? Do you find you like that, or do you find that stressful?
No, oh, I love it. I love writing so much. I get so excited about it. I've never really I know it's work, and there's some parts of the process, especially that kind of like 30 to 60,000 kind of slug space in the middle of like the dirty swamp of writing where you're like, oh, this is really hard. Like I'm going to sit here till I have 2,000 words, and then I can't have dinner until I write it. And that's where we are. But in general, I feel like that's my me time. I get to like do it. I think about it. It's like today I get to write the first chapter of a new book, and it's like I've been thinking about it all day while I was working out, while I was driving. So that'll be my me time because like my kids have been home for a year and a half. So, getting sequestered myself quietly is also very pleasant. But, I didn't know I wanted to be a writer from the beginning. I started out as a visual artist, and I went to school for visual art, and I have an art degree. And I worked in nonprofit art centers, which was a super awesome job, except there's only like 2 in every state. Yeah. And you don't get one unless somebody dies, pretty much. So it got to a point where I couldn't find a job in kind of my chosen career path. So I was home with my children. And then I started writing just because my husband was like, you need a hobby that you can do anywhere, anytime by yourself that's just for you. And so writing was my oasis. Like he would take the kids to Target for 45 minutes and I would get to write. He would stay home with them at night and I would go to Starbucks and I would get to write. And so it still feels like that oasis. It never turned into like, oh, this thing I have to do. It's always like, holy crap, I can't believe I get to do this.
Oh, that's very fun. Very fun. What you mentioned your workout, and I wanted to bring that up just because your Instagram is just like, is this, so you've gone kind of, as far as I can tell, you've gone crazy into weightlifting and biking and things. Is that a lifelong passion or is that like a recent thing?
No, this is brand new. I am before now, I have been like a sedentary sloth person. I don't like exercise. I do not run. I liked riding horses until I broke my back. And then even though I got back in the saddle, it was never quite the same. It wasn't as relaxing because I was always waiting to get thrown again. So, I went into the pandemic with no physical activity at all. And then one day I was like, I'm 40 something. My body feels terrible. I'm just going to go out in the yard and walk 5,000 steps and listen to podcasts while I do it. And I've got to get some exercise or I'm going to die. Like I felt like I was ossifying in place. And so I started doing that. So every day I walked 5,000 steps. And then my friend in Tampa was telling me about how she would bike to the ice cream shop with her kids. And I was like, if I had a bike, could we bike to the ice cream shop? She started riding around her neighborhood to go to the ice cream shop. And like I worked up from like 3 miles to 6 miles to 9 miles to 12 miles. And then she was telling me about how she was going mountain biking. So I was like, if I had a mountain bike, would you take me mountain biking? And then we started mountain biking and I got really into that. So yeah, I've been into mountain biking for about a year now. And it's the closest I can come to horseback riding without a horse because like what I liked about horses was trail riding in the forest. And so basically it's that just I have to do all the work.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like horses are very expensive and my bike is not that hard to maintain.
Right.
Yeah. So then in December, my husband was like, you want to do a body scan and see how you've changed like since you started the walking and the biking. So I went and did a body scan and I saw the results and I was like, I am very upset right now. I do not like this amount of fat that's in my body and the muscle loss and the bone loss I'm suffering. Like I was so upset. I thought that I was going to be like a Superman. Right. And I saw my body scan. I was like, I'm a Jell-O slime mold is what I'm. So I saw that a Facebook friend did Olympic lifting, which is, it's not like random lifting. It's like 2 very specific lifts where you lift the very heavy thing over your head in a way that can be like Olympic scored, I guess. And so I started it and I'm doing it 3 times a week now. And I love it. It's the most cerebral exercise I've ever had to do. Like you really have to, it's such a brain game and you have to think about it. But yeah, it's weird to go from a person who does not own workout clothes to a person who is like, oh, I either have to, do laundry or go buy some more pants because I'm out of workout pants.
Right. I've read before that that basic exercise, even just going on walks, actually is really good for stimulating creativity. Have you found that for yourself?
Oh yeah, I solved so many problems. Like I would just walk circles around my yard, listening to podcasts. So I listen to like, kind of, I don't want to say self-help, more like self-growth and creativity podcasts where they do interviews with people. But when things got boring, they started talking about something I didn't want, my mind would wander and I would figure things out. I used to figure out stuff riding my horse, like the whole like Wake of Vulture series. All those stories kind of got, story broken while I was on trails. So yeah, I get a lot of ideas when I'm moving around and when I'm driving.
Yeah.
And it's turning out that like I have playlists for my books and I used to listen to music a lot, but now I listen to these podcasts and I'll kind of fade out when things get boring and my brain will start working and the ideas will come. It's really interesting to have changed that part of my process because it used to be all music all the time and now it's podcasts.
Yeah, that's interesting. I kind of went through a similar sort of transition. I tend to only be able to focus on one thing at a time. So like I can't really listen to music and try to write or anything like that. And so listening for anything for me used to be only in the car. Or sometimes if I'm playing a video game that I know really well that I can kind of do in my sleep, then I'll put on a podcast or something like that. But yeah, I kind of did that same transition from listening to music over to finding a cool podcast or like a history book on audio or something like that. And I love that for kind of creative inspiration. I listened to one like 2 years ago that I still think about all the time. I don't even remember the title, but it was about basically the secret agents that Britain set up during World War II. And it was just like that kind of stuff. Even though I don't write anything that vaguely resembles World War II, that kind of stuff is so cool in terms of getting your brain going, getting your creative impulses kind of feeling like, oh yeah, that's that little tiny detail is perfect for, this next, scene or something like that.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that the pandemic has made more challenging is I used to get so many little idea seeds, from traveling, things you overhear or see in an airport when you're in a different town. But, you just get those little inspirations and being trapped in your house, your brain, it's hard to get that same level of stimulation and that same level of, novelty.
Yeah, I totally agree. When I, like before the pandemic, I don't think I'd go to nearly as many cons as you do, but I'd still try to hit 4 to 6 a year kind of thing. And I always found that when I got home from being at a convention, my creative brain was it was humming, like having that change of scenery. And like you said, overhearing people talk is one of the funnest things to like kind of make your brain click and do something that it hasn't been doing before. I know creatively during the pandemic, that was my biggest struggle, was that feeling of stagnation, of not seeing or doing or hearing anything new. It was all my office all the time.
Yeah. I mean, there were definitely moments where I had to get really bored, where I had to, kind of unplug and have a drink and just go somewhere where like the couch.
Yeah.
Or the bath, where it's like you can't do anything, like you can't look at screens, like you have to be bored. And that's how I would, figure out little story problems that I had. Yeah.
The shower, a long shower is like my like secret weapon against, writer's block.
Water. It's moving water. Like being at the beach works a lot for me. But yeah, showers and baths and water moving.
Were you near the beach when you lived in Florida?
We were about 45 minutes or an hour away, but it's like when I was there, I wouldn't think of it very much. Now that I'm like, I could have been there, right? Like I want to go to the beach like right this minute, and I could have, but now it's 8 hours away. Like, it's that kind of grass is always greener thing. But at the same time, when you live far away and you go to the beach, it's like, okay, we need at least 4 or 5 days, if not 7. And you have this kind of room to kind of sploot and enjoy yourself. Yeah. Whereas when you live 45 minutes away, it's like, drive there and you have to have brought everything with you. You have to make sure your kids are good and they're not sick and everybody's used the potty and you brought snacks and you have money for the snow cone. And then you get to the beach and like, it may or may not have good weather. It may or may not have good flags. It may or may not have, red tides or whatever. And like somebody gets, scrapes their knee and something happens. And then you have like an hour back home and everybody's like sunburned and sandy and gross. Like it just doesn't have that feeling. It feels like Mad Max, basically.
Right. I remember doing that, like I grew up in Ohio, like right near Lake Erie.
So lots of beaches.
I mean, the beaches in Ohio, they exist and they're gross. Lake Erie is not a good beach, but you still go because you live in the Midwest and that's the best thing. But I remember that trek my mom would do of just filling the back of the car with half of the house, even just for an afternoon to go up and sit at the beach and smell fish.
Yeah.
And it was always, my wife still makes fun of her for bringing like whole pans of brownies for the kids and things like that. It's just,
I won't complain about a whole pan of brownies at the beach.
I mean, I feel the same way. That's just thinking ahead, right? You being prepared.
Yeah, like I knew like which restaurants were on the right on the way there and on the way back.
Right.
Yeah. Racing when everybody gets that kind of like grouchy afternoon attitude.
Yeah, you're all kind of sun-baked and tired and dehydrated, and you gotta do something to pick everybody up.
No, we usually go to the beach every summer. We have the same place at St. Augustine. We've been staying for like 10 years. But my husband's got a new job. One of my kids gets car sick, and Florida is not obeying any mask politeness at all. Like it's just not. It would be an aggressive trip, I think, against my anxiety. But like, I really want to go to the beach right now. But it's either you either have to drive between 5 and 8 hours, or you have to go through the Atlanta airport.
Yeah, neither are good choices.
No, I miss the Tampa airport so much. Like of all the things in Tampa, I miss like sure Busch Gardens, the water park, the zoo. I really miss the airport. So cute and little, and the food was good.
That's great. Now you write and have written in tons of different genres and subgenres. Is that on purpose, or do you just kind of fall into what you want to work on next happens to be different?
Yeah, so I knew from the start I was going to want to write in a lot of genres. Like the first book I ever wrote was a kind of women's fiction, chick fic, whatever they used to call it. And by the time I was querying that, I'd had the next idea, which was a middle grade adventure. Yeah. So when I was querying agents, I only looked for ones that represented middle grade, YA, fantasy, science fiction, women's fiction, romance, kind of the whole gamut. So that was part of the game from the start, I guess. But I just know that I like to jump around, and I want to be able to have the freedom to pursue whatever occurs to me that's very exciting. Yeah. And it's cool. Like I've really gotten to jump around and do a lot of different stuff, and it keeps me from getting bored. Right. So I wrote down a list of various genres and subgenres you've done in steampunk, romance, Star Wars. You've done comics, erotica, comedy, young adult, like weird Western, like just a huge variety. And I kind of like, there's like a business part of me that always is thinking, well, Brian, you have to focus on your brand, and you are now an epic fantasy author, and that's probably what you're going to be forever. But there's also a part of me that I kind of love and admire that kind of genre jumping and being able to work on what looks and sounds cool to you at the time. Is there one that you that rises above the others that you feel more at home in? Or is it kind of all just, whatever's feeling good at the time? Yeah, I mean, it's whatever I'm currently writing is my favorite. Yeah. But no, I mean, these are all, aspects of things that I enjoy. And I don't know, it's like, I don't know. I remember having a conversation with my first agent pretty early on in my career, because the middle grade adventure was on submission for like a year and a half and went to the table twice with an R&R and didn't sell. And then she started selling my steampunk vampire romance. And the next book I was writing was a young adult horror. And she was like, we need to talk about your brand. And I was like, my brand is I do what I want. Right. Which is why my website is Whimsy Dark, because I was like, everything I write is kind of whimsical and kind of dark. Somewhere on that spectrum between whimsical and dark. It's somewhere in there. But I just remember she was kind of annoyed with me. And it was just like, it's never going to stick. It's never, you're trying to put magnets on a steel fridge. Like, it's not going to work. And you want me to be able to dance. Like, you don't want to shackle me to a chair, because I will make a lot more money for you, agent, if you just let me dance. Right. That's cool. What
So the one of them that really, funnily enough, stood out to me is the kind of comedy fantasy you wrote with Kevin Hearne.
Yeah.
I genuinely want to know where that came from, because I know both you and Kevin. And
yeah, this is a good story.
Yeah, and I'd love to hear about that.
Okay, so it started when Charlaine Harris invited Kevin and I to a signing in Texas. And so we were like, sure, why not? And Jay Wells said we could stay with her. So we individually flew to Dallas to stay with Jay Wells and go to a signing with Charlaine Harris and Mark Henry and Rachel Kane. God bless her soul. And it was just a raucous, wonderful, good time. And on the way back, Jay dropped us off at the airport. And we were like, okay, somehow we were in Texas and we never had barbecue. We've got to find barbecue in this airport. And everybody was like, oh, go to this barbecue place in this terminal. And we went there and it was closed. So we went to the next barbecue place that we could find. It was real bad. So I'm from Georgia. I lived in South Carolina. Like, I know good barbecue. It was not good. So we're like 10 o'clock in the morning in the Dallas airport eating this subpar barbecue that we're very well aware is bad barbecue. We're both like kind of like rage eating. Yeah. And was like, hey, buddy, I've got this idea for an anthology where we give the finger to fantasy. And every story is you take a classic fantasy trope and flip it on its head. And it's called, and I'm going to write a story about killing the farm boy. Yeah. And I was like, okay, well, I want to write, the chainmail bikini. And so we started like this list of like people we could ask. And Kevin started sending emails to people. And then we started thinking about like how we're going to corral 12 to 14 writers whose agent is his agent didn't want to represent it. Neither did mine. And, people started asking questions we didn't know how to answer. And he was like, I give up. I can't do this. Like, I'm not the cat herder. I am a writer. Right. And a couple of months went by. So like it just kind of, the idea died. A couple of months went by. And I think I was thinking about, maybe The Expanse or something where I was like, hey, Kevin, if we wrote a book together, we would each write half a book and maybe they would pay us twice as much. And so we took Kill the Farm Boy and we just kind of started batting it around. I think it was on Twitter DMs, just of, fun characters to write. Oh, and what if this? And oh, what in that? And then Kevin wrote a chapter and then I wrote a different chapter. And then we got like 5 chapters and we plotted out 30 chapters where we're just like, in which something. And we sold it on, like 5 chapters and an outline like that. Yeah. So it was all just like 2 friends having a lot of fun over bad barbecue. Mm-hmm. But it was also just a real delight because Kevin's one of my best friends. He's such a good writer. He's so much fun to work with. Yeah. We had the best time with those books. Like the first book, we kind of batted around on Twitter DMs. But then the second book, after we'd sold the series, we were both going to a convention in New Orleans. I think it might have been RT or it might have been a reader con. I can't remember. But we were both in New Orleans and we're like, oh, we're going to go Frenchman Street and just start in a bar and get a drink. And we're going to take a little notepad. And at every bar, we're going to have a drink and just go up the street and just start outlining this book. Yeah. So No Country for Old Gnomes, that's how we did it, was just bar hopping down Frenchman Street, listening to live music, getting weird drinks, looking at weird art. And that's how that book was story broken. And then the third one was in Seattle. We wanted Spam Musubi. So we started at a nice Japanese sushi restaurant and then we ended up at like a tiki hut. And so you can tell that book has kind of maritime influences. And we like name drop Spam Musubi because it was so good. Yeah. So yeah, I was just, those books were so much fun. And they were so easy to write because it wasn't like me toiling away in my attic garret at midnight. It was like Kevin sending me a chapter and I would read it and make little comments like, oh my God, buddy, this is so funny. And then I'd write the next chapter, but would each be trying to make the other person laugh as hard as possible. Yeah. So it was just like playing hopscotch. It was amazing. Oh, and I've heard like that some, co-writers that it's like a very fraught relationship, but ours is just super fun.
Well, and that's one of the reasons I asked about it is because I've always made the assumption that I am a big enough prima donna, that if I was trying to co-write with a friend, it would destroy the friendship. And I'm just kind of amazed that you guys were able to do that. But I guess, maybe I'm not that amazed because if you're coming at it from a point of view of trying to make each other laugh, of it being fun, then it's probably going to be a lot easier to do.
Well, I think the keys here were also like, we had equal ownership. Nobody felt like this is my book. This is my idea. This is my character. Only I can write Fia. Only I can write Gustav. There was just this complete, nobody owns anything, anything is okay, and try to make each other laugh. And we also like when we did, kind of when we critiqued and edited each other's things, we gently were like, oh, I don't really kind of get this joke. Can you explain it to me? Or like, did you mean something more like this? So like, once you take out the ego and you're just both trying to make the best book you can, it was just everything was done in a spirit of kindness and sharing and making the book better as compared to trying to put the other person down. We only had one issue in all 3 books where we kind of had a disagreement, where I'd written a chapter and he'd had something kind of different in mind. And he kind of sent me this note that was like, hey, buddy, I see what you're doing here, but I was really kind of hoping that we could touch on the themes of such and such and such. And I was like, cool, rewrite whatever you want. Like, cut, rewrite, whatever you want. I'm happy to do the next chapter too. Like, just tell me what you want to do. And he was like, oh, okay, well, so he like rewrote 3/4 of the chapter and I wrote the next chapter and we just moved on. So I think if you want to do a co-writing experience, you have to choose someone very close to your level that you super respect, and that you don't have any kind of a chip on your shoulder or negativity or the need to one up, or, not someone that you feel like you're going to roll belly up to, or that they need to kowtow for you. It's probably pretty rare.
Yeah. I always wonder about, Daniel Abraham and Ty Frank doing The Expanse, because The Expanse turned out so amazing, and they did so many books in it. And I constantly think about how I feel like creating something that big and huge, like with 2 people, gosh, like it kind of makes me feel stressed just thinking about the whole process of doing it. Like I don't consider myself super egotistical, but the few times my ego does rear its ugly head, it's bad. And so I just I look at that kind of thing like with all the greatest respect of, holy crap, 2 people were actually able to set aside all their creative whatever differences they have and create something really awesome.
Yeah, ours was probably also a lot easier than theirs on multiple levels, but because ours wasn't a continuous story, it was modular. You could read the books out of order. So we had to remember the world and a couple of the characters, but it wasn't like, it was, once you get to so many books in a series, it's like you have to remember everything that's ever happened in the whole series up until then. And that's a lot of work. My memory doesn't work like that.
Right. I was actually thinking about that with doing tie-in fiction, because you mentioned all of your Star Wars reference books. How the crap do you remember all of that? Because like when I was 16 and I was reading every Star Wars book that came out, I did have a near encyclopedic knowledge of Star Wars, but the number of Star Wars universe things has increased by a factor of 10 since then. Like, how do you keep it all straight?
Well, it's kind of like I can write a story set in my town right now that has nothing to do with Paris, France, even though Paris, France exists in the world and is very important to a lot of people. The Star Wars galaxy is so big. When you kind of section off the portion of your galaxy, it doesn't have that much overlap. So like writing Phasma, first of all, I was writing a book that I wanted to be kind of an open door to Star Wars canon. So you didn't have to have ever read a book to read it. As long as you'd seen The Force Awakens, it would make sense.
Yeah.
So even though there are like lots of Easter eggs for old school fans, I didn't want it to be like, as you know, Bob, the Kuat sector was in, rebellion against the Vong. Like I didn't want any of that really old fashioned stuff. And also because a lot of the canon became legends, we don't have to carry that super big suitcase around. But yeah, Phasma happened on a different planet and on a Star Destroyer that I made up. So outside of like, I couldn't have certain characters because they were off doing something else. Like, there's no Kylo Ren in my book. There's no Emperor. Right. There's no, Boba Fett. Like, so when you have your own little kind of slice of the pie, it doesn't overlap too much. But I did have to talk to Zoraida Cordova, who was writing a book also set in Galaxy's Edge at the same time, to make sure that we kind of didn't step on each other's toes.
Yeah. I had a good question that came in from Twitter that kind of overlaps with all of the IP stuff. Well, I specifically want to ask about IP stuff was, where do you personally draw the line between, when you're working on something, and maybe when you're stuck, especially when you work on something and you're thinking, this is not fun, I am not enjoying this, the process is just a slog, where does that butt up against, this is my job and I need to do it regardless of how much fun I'm having? How do you wrestle with that with something, especially when you have to turn around things so quickly? Yeah,
so I know enough about my process by now to know that between 30 to 60,000 words, I will enter into a part of the book I call the soggy middle, or the swamp of sadness. But basically, it's like, you've had the the beginning of the book and the instigating factor and the conflict's begun. And then you kind of get into the journey where you're just romping across Mordor and you're just kind of tromping. And so what I realized is that I have to entertain myself. If I'm bored, the reader's going to get bored. So I either have to have a moment of action or a moment that reveals character or a moment of conflict. But it's basically like, if I'm bored, I'm not doing my job. So I have to make something happen.
Yeah.
So those are the times when, I put on my playlist and go in the bathtub or the shower and kind of pluck at my mind for something interesting that could happen. But yeah, I mean, that's my job, is coming up with exciting stuff. If something exciting isn't happening, I can blow things up. I can make character kiss. I can have people be attacked. But it's usually like, a lot of my books are journey books. They're, you start here and then you go over here. So you just have to be like, okay, nothing's happened for a while. Something has to happen.
Yeah, that's great. So I've kept you quite a long time, but I've been trying to end each of these interviews with a question that's kind of closer to my heart, which is, what's the last meal that you had that totally blew your mind?
Oh, wow. Oh, I love food so much. Well, I mean, first of all, I like talking to you because you're my friend and I miss you. So I'll just talk to you all day. I miss seeing you, man. I miss playing on all bards.
Oh, man. I miss that as well. That the last few conventions, that was definitely a high point.
Yeah, that was so much fun. But, oh, man, food. I am doing this thing for my health now. I have an autoimmune disease that gets progressively worse as I get older. I have a chronic disease. So my life and body are a lot better if I don't eat a lot of sugar or grains. I can never, ever eat wheat. It messes me up horribly. But grains and milk and sugar, it's best if I'm off of them. So most of the time these days, I am just eating meat, vegetables, and beans or nuts. And I 3 hours a week, I give myself 3 hours a week when I can eat anything. So those are like the 3 best hours of every week. My daughter is an incredible baker right now. And almost every week she's baking some kind of cupcakes. So as soon as she makes them, I freeze 2 of them and have a little stash in the freezer of like my aluminum wrapped cupcake bombs. So the first thing I do when I have my 3 hours is I eat her cupcake.
So homemade cupcakes, man, that sounds amazing. That's great.
Well, and gluten-free flour has gotten so good these days that like, gluten-free cupcakes used to kind of taste like a sponge wearing a top hat. But like now they're just as good as, I'll pass like a cupcake store and be like, my daughters are better.
Yeah.
But my son, the day that his second vaccine kicked in, he wanted to do 2 things that he hadn't gotten to do for a year and a half. He's 12. He wanted to go to the trampoline park and he wanted to go to the melting pot. So it was very memorable because I got to take him to the melting pot and just eat like all of the cheese and all of the meat and then I only let myself have like a couple of spoonfuls of the chocolate. But I mean, that was very memorable just because it was so special to him. But I could describe like every meal. I love food. Yeah. And we've been, well, here in Atlanta, there's a lot of good dining. So we're kind of like dining outside at 4:30 on a Wednesday because we're still a little like, don't breathe on me.
Right. Oh, that's great. Well, fantastic. Thanks so much for taking the time to just hang out and chat with me for an hour. It's been super cool to catch up with you.
Thanks for asking. It's been the best. Yeah.
That was author Delilah S. Dawson. Thanks again to Delilah for sharing her time with me. You can find links to Delilah's social media and some of her books down in the show notes. You can find me, as always, at brianmcclellan.com. Special thanks to James Sutter for music and Tom Bishop for production. If you'd like to support the podcast, head on over to patreon.com/pagebreak or buy my books in ebook, paperback, or audio. Don't forget to like and subscribe.